Hi folks, hope you're all well. Today I have the pleasure and privilege of my guest being Roy Schoeman. Roy is a Jewish convert to the Catholic faith with a really uniquely remarkable conversion story. So if you're not familiar with Roy already, I'd really encourage you to listen to his testimony. Roy's a highly educated gentleman. He had his undergraduate in MIT and then subsequently went on to do his master's in Harvard, before then actually working as faculty at Harvard Business School. He has since become an evangelist, basically full time. And Roy is mainly busy working at the moment with a YouTube channel and podcast and website, all of the same name, Salvation is from the Jews. And it's all, I suppose, stemming from the book that Roy got published in 2003 by the same name, Salvation is from the Jews. So Roy, thanks very much for coming on the show. How are you keeping?
I'm well. I have no complaints. I'm very happy with how things are going.
Good. That's great to hear. I suppose, well, just straight off the bat, the best thing for myself to do would be to be quiet. And if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners who aren't familiar with your story already, just your own background and I suppose your conversion story to the Catholic faith.
Okay, great. Well, I don't like to get bogged down in my childhood. You know, once one childhood is enough. I don't want to have to return to it. But anyway, I was born and raised Jewish, suburb of New York City. My parents were both German Jewish Holocaust refugees. My family was fairly religious, and I actually was even more religious just by nature. And I went to Jewish religious education all the way through from the beginning of school until university. I took it very seriously. I took God very seriously. And it never occurred to me that anyone else had the same access to God as the Jews had. I'm not sure I ever thought too seriously about what situation they were in, but I certainly knew that we had the inside track, or I thought I knew we had the inside track. We did, but only for 2,000 years, not for the last 2,000 years. We lost the inside track, but that's another story. So anyway, I was quite religious growing up. I went to MIT, and that's Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's an engineering and science school, probably the best in the country, in our country, in the colonies. And I lost my faith there under the pseudoscientific worldview that religion is just a superstition that man came up with until he had science to give him all the real answers to all the big questions. And anything that science can't answer today, it will be able to answer in 5 years. Tremendous hubris there. And so anyway, I lost my faith there. I thought that in good conscience, I could no longer believe in God, literally. So I was essentially atheist by the time I got out. I went on, after a few years of working as a computer scientist, I went on to Harvard Business School. And I did well enough there to be invited back to join the faculty. And I found myself a newly minted professor of marketing at Harvard Business School at the ripe old age of 29. And that's really the beginning of my witness testimony, because all my life I knew there has to be a real meaning and purpose to life. I thought I would come into that when I got older. I thought it would come from entering into a personal relationship with God, which I very genuinely thought would happen at my bar mitzvah when the child turns 13. It's quite analogous to Catholic confirmation. There's a ceremony in the synagogue. And I really thought, and a big party afterwards, by the way, just like confirmation. And I really thought that at my bar mitzvah, I would enter a personal relationship with God. And when that didn't happen, it's actually one of the saddest days of my childhood, my disappointment. But then pretty soon I decided the real meaning and purpose of life would come when I got a driver's license, or when I began university, or when I got a girlfriend, or if I got into Harvard Business School, or when I began my career. You know, I kept externalizing things. But the problem was, at this point, I was already more successful in a worldly career than I ever expected to be. But there was still no meaning or purpose to life. We're just a chemical accident. We live for 80 or 90 years and then we die, and that's it. There's no meaning or purpose to anything. There's no pattern to anything. And the problem was, at this point, there was nothing more I could imagine out there in the future that would give my life real meaning. So I fell into the deepest despair of my life at that point. And it was in that I was walking in nature early one morning when I received the most spectacular grace of my life. I was just walking along, and from one moment to the next, the curtain between the spiritual world and the physical world disappeared. And I found myself looking into the spiritual world, but that's not really the biggest part of this experience. The biggest part of this experience was finding myself in the presence of God, very knowingly in the presence of God, in a state of tremendous communion and communication with God, and experiencing my life and understanding my life as I would if I had died and was looking back over my life in the presence of God. Now, when this experience happened, I had long since given up of any hope of believing in God. And yet I was so intimately in his presence that it's very hard to describe this, but it's going to sound like something out of Star Trek, but it was like a mind meld. It was like I could not pose a question in my mind without being shown the answer. It wasn't words spoken, but it was a communion of thoughts, really. So anyway, in this experience, I saw that my two greatest regrets when I died would be, number one, all of the time and energy I had wasted worrying about not being loved, when every moment of my existence I was held in an ocean of love greater than I ever imagined could exist, coming from this all-knowing, all-loving God. And the other great regret would be every hour I had wasted doing nothing of value in the eyes of heaven. I saw that needless to say, it's all true, that we live forever, that here I was so worried about life having no meaning or purpose, when in fact, every minute had an infinite meaning and purpose, because it had the possibility of doing something of value in the eyes of heaven, for which we will be rewarded for all eternity. So I saw how I'm losing my train of thought a little bit. I'll just try to recollect the various aspects of this experience. I saw how foolish I had been, living my life sort of looking in the rearview mirror, saying to myself, if only that hadn't happened, then I would be happy today. Or if only that hadn't happened, then I would be happy today. When in fact, absolutely everything that had ever happened to me had been the most perfect thing that could be arranged, coming from the hands of an all-knowing, all-loving God, not only including those things that had caused the most suffering at the time, but especially those things that had caused the most suffering at the time, that I had thought of as the greatest disasters at the time. And by far the biggest aspect of this experience, the most transformative aspect of this experience, was coming into the immediate awareness and experience of God's infinitely personal love for me. That as a Jew, it had never occurred to me that God even knew me by name. But this God, who was the God who not only created everything that exists, but quite literally created existence itself, not only knew me by name, not only had been arranging everything that ever happened to me, that the most perfect thing that could possibly happen to me, but had known about how I felt and cared about how I felt at every moment of my existence, as though I were the only creature I had ever created. And as though in a very real sense, everything that made me happy made him happy, and everything that made me sad made him sad. And it was coming into that awareness. There isn't a word for it. I mean, because it wasn't an intellectual awareness, it was the experience of it that was by far the most transformative. I understood there was never any reason to be anxious about anything. And there's certainly never any reason to be concerned about not being loved when God himself loved me more than I could ever imagine or hope for. So that's basically it. I went back home happier than I had ever been in my life. I knew there's never any reason to be anxious about anything. I knew about, as I said, not only did God know me by name, but but he doted on me as though I was the only person he had ever created. And I also knew I was a marketing professor. I was pretty selfish at the time. And I also knew that here I had been so foolishly selfish, putting my time and energy into things that wouldn't do me any good at all, even, 100 years later after I'm dead. And if I want to be smart and selfish, the only thing that made sense would be to try to spend every hour doing something of value in the eyes of heaven and being rewarded for it for all eternity. It had a much better net present value, and a much better, discounted cash flow, so to speak. Any economists out there. So anyway, that's about it, actually. For the short version of my witness testimony. I'm sure that if you want to go in any directions, I'll throw the ball back into your court.
That's fine. I mean, I'd really like to touch on the Our Lady experience as well. I'd actually written out questions, but based on everything that you've just said, I kind of.
I'll throw out the written questions.
I have other questions now,
Conversation is always much better than written questions.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, first of all, you must have like a really unique approach to life day to day since that happened. You must, like, I don't know, do you take it don't have any anxiety ever now? And do you just, I can understand now why you're so constantly utilizing your time on a daily basis, like saying the Divine Mercy Chaplet, for example, on live streams every day, because as you say, like every minute wasted is waste. Like you have a unique insight as to how important utilizing every day is, I guess. So yeah, like has that experience to this day, what is it, 20 years later approximately, do you still have no
Thank you for the compliment. Thank you for the compliment.
You know what I mean? Like
it's closer to, it's at least 30 years
30,
ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, first of all, no, I get anxious a lot. I have to remind myself of this. It's one of the side benefits of giving my witness testimony, actually, is it brings it back.
Yeah.
But no, I don't live in nirvana, 24/7.
Yeah.
And but I know it. I don't have faith, actually, by the way. I'm in a lot of trouble when I die, if I get to heaven, because I don't have faith. I have memory. I have memory and experience. And I have profound respect for people who actually believe all of this stuff and don't have their own experience to back it up.
I don't understand. How can you not have the faith bit now? If you have, like,
because it's not faith if you've seen it. It's not faith if you've seen it.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Faith is confidence in things unseen, I think St. Paul says, more or less.
Yeah.
So there's look at what happened when Jesus returned, a week after the resurrection, and St. Thomas, wanted to stick his fingers in his side. And Jesus said, you believe because you see, but blessed are those who believe who have not seen. I don't qualify for that.
But you've got a specific mission, like I wouldn't count yourself down on that front.
I'm not. I'm just having fun.
Yeah. Wow. So then in terms of, I'm also interested, because really bizarrely, anyone who watches my channel, it's a mess in terms of, there's a faith element. You've alluded to net present values there. There's an economics element. Basically faith, freedom, faith, finance, freedom, and free markets, effectively. That's pretty much all the F's I cover here. So in terms of life spent looking at worldly things, would you pretty much just rule them all out as wasted time? Or like, what are your thoughts in terms of people who are concerned with the economy or concerned with just different worldly things? Do you think people in general should be all fully focusing on God more and spiritual matters more, or is the balance that we have okay? Or what are your thoughts there?
I don't know if balance is exactly the right word. First of all, the only really important reading to do, I mean, sure, I'll get to this issue of the temporal requirements. But the most spiritually important reading to do is that of the saints, because by definition, they know better than anybody else what God wants of you on earth. And the saints are unanimous in saying that doing your worldly duty properly is the heart of virtue. You know, if you're a mother raising your children properly, seeing them, you know, washed and clothed and fed and sent off to school, or better yet, homeschooled, you know, that's the job that God has given you. That's your vocation. You know, whatever your duty is your vocation. So you don't improve on, God doesn't want you to follow another vocation other than the one he's given you. So by all means, if you're a father of a family, you know, taking care of the finances of the family, keeping from getting fired. Let's hope it doesn't require getting a poison jab in order not to get fired. But anyway.
Oh, I wasn't going to ask you about that, but
I didn't say anything. I did not. I was not referring to anything in particular.
My mom, if she watches this, is going to really enjoy this up to now, and then just be like, "I'm turn this off." And that's exactly why I'm going to show it, by the way. But
yeah, you can clip it out. But anyway, you know, doing your daily duty by the people, you know, that's your vocation. That's your primary vocation. But you should be doing your daily duty in the eyes of God, so to speak, knowing that God is watching over you, knowing that it's what God wants you to do, but also knowing that you should be taking any advantage of any opportunity to be pleasing to God in so doing. You never know when that might pop up. It may pop up when your coworker uses the name of our Lord in vain, you know, and if circumstances allow, you say, you know, I take Jesus very seriously, and you may want to not do that, especially around me. I'd appreciate it. You know what I mean? You never know when an opportunity may pop up. But God called me, I believe, to turn my back on my career at Harvard Business School, which was not easy to do. I mean, in other words, you know, I still feel a little magnetic pull at times just thinking about what my life could be like had I not, you know, turned my back on that. But anyway, I know that he did, and he called me to what I'm doing, and I'm in a position where I'm able to do it. But it's unusual. Usually it's your normal responsibilities that are your vocation.
Yeah. So in one of the other testimony videos that you gave, I suppose just because I actually saw it very shortly after I joined the Legion of Mary a few weeks ago, and I have always had miraculous medals because, again, my mom stuffed them in my pocket and wallet and things like this when I was growing up. But I never really knew anything about the miraculous medal until my first duty with the Legion of Mary a few weeks ago was basically to hand out miraculous medals in Belfast city centre here in town with a couple of others. So I had to learn the story behind the miraculous medal, and I made a video actually kind of just explaining what it was all about. And then I suppose it was just the way the algorithm worked, or potentially providence. But then I came across your testimony. So would you like to just tell us about your experience with Our Lady, and also just how you knew that? So initially you knew that you'd experienced God, but you didn't know that God was Jesus. Is that correct? And
that's absolutely correct. First of all, my experience of him was in his divine nature, so to speak. There was no human nature that revealed itself to me. I did not see, you know, a Middle Eastern man with shoulder-length hair or whatever and a long beard. It really was an experience of the divinity of God. And I know it was Christ, but certainly didn't at the time. But I knew that it was God, and I knew that he was my Lord and Master and God in an extremely personal way. Those are the terms that came to my mind, was Lord and Master and God, which is not really the Jewish way of thinking about God. I'm going to take a little side road here. The reason why Judaism sees God very differently and as far more distant and is not because Judaism has it wrong. It's that the relationship between God and man was transformed with the coming of Christ, which is kind of the whole point of Judaism. And if you look at the Old Testament, it's literally true. God did not speak to ordinary people. He only spoke through the prophets and the priests. And there is a prophecy in Joel, I believe it is, where the Lord says, the day is coming when you won't have to run to this person and that person and say, tell me about God, but I will make myself known to the lowliest manservant and maidservant among you. That's exactly what happened with the incarnation. St. Peter quoted that prophecy at the first Pentecost Sunday sermon that he gave. So it's not that Jews are wrong, it's that Jews are 2,000 years behind the times. In that sense, they're wrong. So it was quite notable that I thought of him at the time as my Lord and God and Master, and not, not as the God of the Old Testament, let's say. But anyway, I didn't know who he was. And but every night before going to sleep after that first experience, I would say a short prayer I had made up to know the name of my Lord and God and Master who had revealed himself to me. I had to make up prayers. I didn't know any real prayers. And a year to the day after that initial experience, I went to sleep and I thought I was woken by a hand on my shoulder and led to a room and left alone with the most beautiful young woman I could ever imagine. And I knew without being told that it was the Blessed Virgin Mary. And she offered to answer any questions I might have for her. So I asked her 6 or 7 questions, which she answered. And the next morning when I woke up, this experience had taken place while my body was asleep in bed. I thought I was awake at the time. My memory represents it as though I were awake. So I had been awake, but in fact, I now understand I was asleep. I had no idea that I was at the time. But anyway, when I woke up the next morning, I knew who the Blessed Virgin Mary was. I knew that she is absolutely unique in her relationship between divinity and humanity. I actually knew that all of the grace that flowed from divinity into humanity flowed through the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I was never dumb. So if this is the Blessed Virgin Mary, obviously it was Christ in the first experience. Yeah. I actually literally did not ask her that. I didn't have to ask her that. It was kind of obvious. So I knew it had been Christ. I knew I wanted to be as fully Christian as possible. I didn't know the difference between a Protestant and a Catholic. And I couldn't really do anything other than open a local phone book. And I started going to a Protestant church. But as soon as I knew the pastor a little bit, I shyly asked him, what about the Blessed Virgin Mary? And when he answered rather dismissively, he was, by the way, a fallen away Catholic. I knew this is no place for me. So my understanding who the Blessed Virgin Mary is, and actually really who she is, in other words, her role in the economy of salvation, led me pretty directly to the Catholic Church.
Wow. So can I just ask about the in that experience you wanted to say a prayer to Our Lady, but you didn't know the Hail Mary, is that correct?
In that experience, when I first found myself in her presence, I was overwhelmed by who she was. And all I wanted to do was throw myself on my knees and somehow honor her appropriately. So my first thought was, oh my goodness, I wish I at least knew the Hail Mary, but I didn't. So as a way of getting her to teach me the Hail Mary, I asked her what her favorite prayer to her was. Indirect, right? Because I didn't want to admit I didn't know it. Her initial answer was somewhat coy. It was, I love all prayers to me. But I was a little bit pushy. And I said, but you must love some prayers more than others. And she relented and she recited a prayer, but it was in Portuguese and I didn't know any Portuguese. So all I could do was make the effort to remember the first few words phonetically. And the next morning when I woke up, I wrote them down phonetically. And later, when I met a Portuguese Catholic woman, I asked her to recite all of the Marian prayers in Portuguese so that I could try to identify it. And to the best of my ability, I identified it as, O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee. So, which of course is the prayer from the Miraculous Medal, which I did not know at the time. Well, I shouldn't say that. By the time I had that Portuguese woman recite the prayers, I might have known it, because that was a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time of the experience, I certainly didn't even know the Hail Mary, much less about the Miraculous Medal.
That's an incredible, unique insight in itself. Just the fact that, yeah, it was 1830, I think, St. Catherine Labore, Our Lady came to her and asked her to have the Miraculous Medal basically made with that prayer on it. And the fact that you didn't know it at all, and she's come to you and said that that's her favorite prayer, effectively. I don't know. It's just it's nice whenever these little things are revealed to us, and makes it all the more confusing whenever people refuse to believe this. You know.
No, I
for example, you know,
like what?
Especially fallen away Catholics, like the pastor that you were referring to, for example.
Yeah, well, I have yet. I'm going to get in trouble. I have yet to meet a fallen away Catholic who did not have moral reasons for deciding the Catholic Church was not true, or immoral reasons.
Well, yeah, flip. You could have an entire discussion on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's an overstatement.
Themselves included, you know.
But usually, the Catholic Church is the only place where you have the rules really laid down in black and white. At least you used to, and very often there is a personal temptation to reject the Catholic Church because it is too restricting in what you're allowed to do.
Especially in the world today, I suppose, where we're kind of diverging more than ever in terms of what the Catholic Church teaches and what the world says is.
Right. Because, I mean, 100 years ago, never mind 100 years ago, when I was a child, divorce was scandalous. As a matter of fact, when I was a child, and well, you're awfully young, but when I was a child in England also, I believe that infidelity was the only grounds for divorce, right? People had to have a correspondent. Remember that? No, you don't. Well, it occurs in a lot of literature.
I've heard that. Absolutely, yeah. It's Ireland, by the way. Well, Northern Ireland.
Oh yeah, sorry. That probably.
You're very far away.
But anyway, that when I was growing up in like New York State, the only grounds for divorce were adultery, because Jesus said, except in the case of immorality, right? So anyway, now, now it's a joke. I mean, now you have a prenuptial agreement because you're expecting a divorce. But the Catholic Church still has the nerve to say, no, divorce doesn't exist.
Yeah, I know it's a strange one, but that whole idea of prenup, like where I'm from, you would still see it as a very American thing. You know, there are different things. Like, I'm not saying that we're any better. We're pretty much in the exact same place as you are, but for some reason, it's never really been something that's caught on here. Thank God. So, but it does. It just seems like you're setting yourself up to fail.
Well, like, it's actually. According to the Catholic Church, you're not married if you have a prenuptial agreement. Seriously, the sacrament has not taken effect. Because I don't know this, I don't have the phrase memorized, but for the sacrament to take effect, you have to enter into it knowing what it is, and one of the things it is indissoluble. So if you're making preparations for the dissolution of it, I believe it's a violation of the sacrament, and I actually think it's grounds for annulment. But have a priest on your program, and you're a canon lawyer or something, and you can have someone speak with more authority. But I'm pretty sure that it's actually very much against the rules in the Catholic Church to have a prenuptial agreement.
What's the point? Like, what's the point of getting into something like that if you're setting it up in such a way,
Well, I mean, if you're worth $5 billion and you don't want to see it become $2.5 billion.
That's true. It's only money. So one thing actually, I'll just tell you about that. I've just started trying to do. I just made a video on this like last week. I know that you speak frequently on Radio Maria.
I have a weekly show.
Yeah. So I had that. It was wonderful to be invited on to speak on Radio Maria Ireland a couple of weeks ago for it's called a Men for Christ conference. But after that, a young lady reached out to me, and because I was speaking about things like the Great Reset, a small bit in it, she basically said that I think we need to do something significant that will bring about a great reset of faith. So rather than kind of focusing on some of the negative things in the world today, it's kind of just doing one thing which would focus entirely on this kind of more hopeful thing to happen. So basically her suggestion was that we do a worldwide perpetual rosary. So basically have one person every hour for an entire year saying the rosary. And basically we need 8,760 people to volunteer 1 hour each to make this happen. So I might try and call upon your support, and anyone who watches your channel or your podcast to sign up if you'd like. The Great Reset of Faith. Sorry, it's greatresetoffaith@gmail.com. If you'd like to email and just write your name.
Okay, well, I'll do you a favor since I'm the nerd here.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can do this here.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's see. greatresetoffaith.com.
Great. It's an email address, so it's greatresetoffaith@gmail.com.
Oh,
so,
okay.
No space.
I'll shrink it down so that it'll come back on the screen. Oh, and it's all one word, right? No spaces.
Yeah, exactly.
So I better get that done. And see, this is what you could do if you had an encoder.
OBS Studio, baby. Gonna be getting on it.
You got it. So let me shrink that down.
Yeah, that's it. Perfect. So yeah, again, it's just, I suppose, 4 things: your name, your email address, which will be implied by the fact you're sending it from that email, and then your time zone and your location. Again, your time zone will probably be implied, but it's just easier to organize. But yeah, so I think we're up to like 15 in a week. So we've quite a while to go to get 8,760, but you know, God willing, we'll get there. We just need the right people to do the shout out. But yeah, I just thought that was a really good idea, you know, because, and I suppose that can lead me on to asking you about from what I've seen since basically the beginning of lockdown, or the beginning of all this jazz, say March, April 2020, whatever it was, there's been a massive increase that I've seen in terms of the online Catholic community, which is wonderful in terms of people building knowledge about our faith and kind of I suppose the worldwide community element to it. And you have obviously predated 99% of channels and shows and things like this. I think the first time you were on The Journey Home was 2005 or something like that, wasn't it? So like, have you been buoyed by the last couple of years in terms of seeing the increase in faith online anyway, or what have your thoughts been about all
Well,
this?
yeah, I mean, it was a very pleasant, you know, silver lining, so to speak, to the cloud, because my ministry used to be mostly in person, you know. I used to go around to parishes, a lot in the UK, by the way, including in Ireland, although you are the UK, right? Or you're not the UK?
Complicated. Ireland isn't. Northern Ireland is.
Yeah, and you're Northern Ireland. So
and we're kind of 50% of the people here identify as Irish, 50% as British. So
okay, but anyway,
it's a perennial thing, you know. We're all children of God. That's the important thing.
Yeah, but anyway, I used to, you know, be on the road most of the time, and that all shut down with this pandemic. And you know, I was kind of, I don't want to say I was going crazy, but I mean, you know, I had no one to preach to or teach or whatever. And I discovered, like you actually, I started out very primitive with my technology. Sorry, I can't help it. But you know, just with the built-in laptop camera and the built-in, you know, YouTube, whatever YouTube provides, and started giving talks, and it snowballed. So I've been very heartened. Although I really miss the personal interaction, You know, I don't get invited to a parish and have 12,000 people listen to me, but I do a YouTube series or something, and I have 12,000 people or 25,000 people or whatever. So yeah, it's wonderful, and it's wonderful. Yeah, it's wonderful. And my daily Divine Mercy chaplet and usually Rosary, you know, every day in and day out, you know, there are 110, 120 people live, and another 8 or 9 or 1,000, 8 or 900 or 1,000, you know, over the course of the next 24 hours. It's amazing. There's no way that I could get to so many people pre COVID.
Yeah, there's something nice, like warm and comforting in seeing the same people popping up every day. You know, you just become like, it's a different form of friend network. You know, you can't see them, as you say, in real life, but they're very real nonetheless. You know, it's nice to have.
No, and the community that they form among themselves, it's all very, you know, it's all very touching. So yeah, I guess God draws good out of everything.
Yeah, it's true. There's been you know, you said pandemic, but I've just seen so much good in this last year and a half. Even like I had a walk today with one of my friends, and the amount we've got out in nature over this last year and a half, more so than kind of running much more of a rat race like lifestyle the previous 8 years. You know, everything's slowed down so much since the beginning of it, and there's been a lot of good, and like you say, it's purely God's hand in things, you know, and it's all ultimately part of his plan anyway. So yeah, it's interesting. Let me see. Yeah, just in terms of, I suppose, salvation is from the Jews, then would you like to just quickly tell us a bit about your book and yeah, so we can see you on your YouTube channel and podcast as well at Salvation from the Jews. Yeah, do you want to just tell us a bit about the two of those?
Sure. Let me think of where to start. First of all, I'll do what I did before, and make use of my ability to type here, so that people can have to spell correctly. From Jews.com. Okay. Let me pull that up here. There. That is my website, which one can branch out from there to, you know, my books and my YouTube channel and my videos and everything. And the reason, well, okay, I'll back up and say what this is all about. When I entered the Catholic Church, you know, I was a Jew who entered the Catholic Church, and occasionally a cradle Catholic would come up to me and, you know, throw their arms open and say, "Welcome to our church." And I couldn't help thinking they had it backwards. It should be me saying to them, "Welcome to my church," because the Catholic Church is post-Messianic Judaism. It's a continuation of Judaism after the coming of the Jewish Messiah, having undergone the transformation that was always intended to transform it from being restricted to a particular ethnic group to being for all of humanity. Not only transform it, but of course, improve it, you know, 100 million times. But nonetheless, it is the transformation of Judaism into post-Messianic Judaism. And I was a little puzzled that wasn't the view of every Irish Catholic I came across. By the way, I had a friend, I don't know if you ever heard, you probably didn't, it's our generation gap, but Brendan Walsh. He was a Catholic evangelist in Ireland. He was pretty big about 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And I was friends with him. And when my book came out, Salvation is from the Jews, you know, he said to me, "What do you mean salvation is from the Irish?" But anyway, it puzzled me that this was not the normal view, that they're not two different religions, like my religion and your religion. They're one plan for salvation that God came up with in the Garden of Eden when man fell, and that plan of salvation by its nature needed to be divided into a preparation phase, which was Judaism, and a realization phase, which was the Catholic Church and the sacraments. So basically, out of that indignation at the world's misunderstanding of what the Catholic Church really was, I wrote Salvation is from the Jews, which was my first book. And I'm looking around to see if I have a copy within reach, but I don't. Where was I? Yeah, I wrote it. And if anyone's scandalized by the title, which is somewhat scandalous, Salvation is from the Jews, I will point out that comes from the lips of Jesus himself in John 4:22, when he was speaking to the Samaritan woman. He said, salvation is from the Jews. So even though it sounds very Jewish chauvinist, take it up with Jesus. But anyway, it was published by Ignatius Press, and it became a bestseller, Catholic bestseller. And, as you mentioned, then I was invited on to EWTN, and it kind of started this whole public ministry. But that's, the book is about essentially the role of Judaism in salvation history from a Catholic perspective. Now, Catholic perspective is just another way of saying the truth or the whole story or the real story or something like that. When it comes to salvation history and the unfolding of salvation, it really is the Catholic Church that kind of has a monopoly on the fullness of the revelation about it. So anyway, so that just is, now that's what I do, and it's, the purpose is to, among other things, nothing is more, in some sense, infuriating to me than when a good Catholic explains to me that they're Catholic because their parents were Catholic, but you're Jewish because your parents are Jewish, and that's what you should be because your parents were Jewish, and I should be Catholic because my parents are Catholic. That's not what it's about. It's God's plan for salvation of all of mankind. And when you span the Old Testament and the New Testament, when you stretch out the tableau to encompass both Judaism and the Catholic Church, it becomes more apparent.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I'll go one negative and then one positive to finish. Just because you started, I suppose you mentioned that your parents fled Nazi Germany, and then obviously you've said two different comments which give me an insight as to your thoughts on what's going on in the world at the moment. It would be remiss of me to then not ask you, do you see parallels? What are your thoughts in terms of the madness engulfing our world today?
It's not, would that it were madness. Would that it were madness. That would be nice. It's not madness. It's a very good, malevolent plot.
Yeah.
It's a plot for worldwide domination and enslavement of all of humanity. Today is the anniversary of the miracle of the sun at Fatima, the day that we're taping this, October 13th. And the Blessed Virgin Mary said to Lucia that if the right conditions are not met, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world. And I think you could say that the Great Reset is actually, from heaven's point of view, Russia spreading her errors throughout the world, because the Great Reset is actually subjecting all of humanity to a totalitarian, autocratic, centralized government that has control over all the means of production and all of the fruits of production, all of the wealth of the world, and essentially turning everyone in the world into serfs, which is actually what communism does too, only in a country. So parallel, Hitler just didn't dream big enough.
To start, but you know what I mean? Because I heard in our local propaganda station / radio station the other day that someone alluded to that, and the presenter and whoever else was on tag teaming on the one person who was standing up for freedom effectively. They ridiculed this woman, basically saying, how dare you compare this to Nazi Germany, you know. And obviously things start somewhere. We're only at the start at the moment, you know. It's about where the potential is that it's going to lead to. And like you say, I mean, they're already setting up camps all over the world. I mean,
no, I think if this is successful, it just totally dwarfs the Third Reich. There is a difference, by the way. There's a wonderful Hasidic Jewish man, Zelenko. I don't know, you know, does that name mean anything to you? He's the Zelenko protocol. He came up with the first successful treatment for COVID-19. Those are words that you're not allowed to say on YouTube, so I won't say the words. Yeah. But the protocol of very benign drugs that I think he's had over 9,000 patients, and he lost 2, and they were both like in their 90s or something. Anyway, he's a Hasidic man, and he's certainly not insensitive to the Holocaust. And Hasidic is the ultra-Orthodox Jews, by the way. And he says, I mean, the Holocaust was nothing compared to what is being planned. I mean, he thinks that 2 billion people might be killed by the what you already told me I'm not supposed to say, but that if the Gates plan for universal vaccination goes through, 2 billion people is his estimate of how many will die. It doesn't have the specifically anti-Jewish orientation that the Third Reich had. But that's not entirely relevant, actually. I mean, in other words, I mean, you know, it's certainly genocide on a much huger scale, and the inhumanity of it is unbelievable. I mean, if you look at what happens to people who have a negative reaction, you know, some of them suffer in a way worthy of a comparison with Auschwitz. Actually, you know, you can see videos of people who are paralyzed but spasming, you know, almost 24 hours a day, and then when they stop spasming, they're totally exhausted because their muscles have been going full speed, or you know, they talk about you know, the pain coming from every cell in their body and so forth. And this is knowingly inflicted. This is knowingly inflicted. I believe it's knowingly inflicted. So I'm not sympathetic to people who say, you know, how dare you compare to the, you know, to the Holocaust. It does not have the ad hominem quality that the Holocaust had in its animosity towards Jews, but that doesn't seem to me to be the heart of the problem.
Well, I'm sure we could have an entire different conversation about that whole thing. We potentially could do another day, because it's a great conversation we're having, and I'm enjoying it. But I've kept you much longer than I said I would. So just lastly, to finish on something positive, is there anything you're particularly looking forward to in the short to medium term?
The end of the world. The second coming.
Going home. The
second coming. No, if you're talking about, you know, speaking engagements, they've started up again. I always look forward to them. Yep. But I don't know what the future holds. There's one thing that I know for sure, which is who holds the future, and of course, and that's God. And that absolutely nothing that happens isn't either permitted or willed by God. And because he is all good and all powerful, he does not, it's impossible for him to permit or will anything which is not for the greater good. So if it looks like evil, if it looks like pure malevolent evil, the trick is to look past it to the good that's underlying it, because God wouldn't be allowing it if there wasn't a good underlying it. And that's actually why I mentioned the second coming, because we know what the state of the world is going to be like shortly before the second coming. I recommend that everybody read the book of Revelation seriously, and don't worry about not understanding a word of it. Just read it for the pictures, so to speak. You go nuts if you try to put together, what's this seal and what's that seal and which angel did this and what's the sequence of this and how come it seems to be in another sequence here. But just look at the pictures of all of the suffering that's going to be poured out on the face of the earth because of the justice that God actually is kind of required to inflict for the aggregate amount of sin. So you look at that, and in that context, if in fact things turn out as bad as they possibly could in this round of what's going on, then it could easily be the lead up to the second coming, because it's pretty consistent. In other words, we know that the world is going to be suffering like it's never suffered before in the period immediately before the second coming. So, maybe the silver lining is going to be the second coming. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Either that or the good guys riding in on their, cavalry and taking control and, getting rid of all the bad guys. But short of that, I'm looking forward to the second coming.
Yeah, the question is if it is the latter, I suppose, in terms of the good guys rolling in. It's just how many years or decades it's going to take. That's the one thing we don't really know. It could be a long, based on how long things went under the Soviet Union with the gulags, and based on how long World War II went on for, and the fact that this is global, and if it isn't the second coming happening soon, it could be a
I actually
roller coaster we're in for. But,
no, I think that if this actually gains traction, then there will be no possible reverse in the future. In other words, this will either be stopped in the next 18 months, let's say, or it's probably the second coming, because those examples you gave, there were other countries involved. It wasn't global. The Soviet Union fell, but it didn't fall because of the Soviet Union. It fell because of the Western world, and in part because of the United States. And the Third Reich fell because of, actually largely because of the United States. I don't want to sound like a chauvinist, but there were other.
I would argue it was actually the Russians, but so go ahead. Of course, your own propaganda.
Well, yeah, the Russians, the Russians certainly helped.
I'm just talking about.
But but that was incredibly stupid of Hitler anyway. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
But anyway, fine. Because there was Russia and the United States. There were opposing forces. But the interesting thing about this reset is that it's global, and the technology didn't exist. The technology exists for global control now. The technology for global control didn't exist 30 years ago. Yeah. By the way, I know you want to get me off, but there's a very interesting book called IBM and the Holocaust. Right. And the Third Reich couldn't have operated without IBM machines. Seriously. Yeah. And the IBM actually sent full-time employees and set up offices in the Third Reich in order to enable the Third Reich to organize the extermination of the Jews well enough. It's historical and it's well-documented book, and a lot of the stuff isn't secret. But I told my father, who lived in Germany at the time, and he said, we always wondered how the Nazis knew exactly what houses had Jews in them, in every town. And it turned out that in those days, they were punch cards. You don't remember that. You're much too young. But they weren't computers per se, but there was information put on punch cards, which then went through sorting machines, which the Third Reich used and made sure they knew where all of the Jews' addresses were. And they could just spit it out of the machine, in this town, what are the addresses where Jews are living? So you need technology to control a population. And they have the technology now to have one centralized world government. So it's an interesting prospect. But the the real source for hope is more than hope. It's certainty. It's that everything that happens is being permitted or willed by God for a good end that's better than the end would be if it weren't happening, period.
Brilliant. Well, we also have the technology now for the first time ever for the Great Reset of Faith. So yes, worldwide,
Okay.
Perpetual Rosary at greatresetoffaith@gmail.com. All right, Roy Schoeman, thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you.
We got an hour, so that's value for money. Anyway, lovely speaking to you, and God bless, sir.
God bless. Bye.